Unashamed, the recovery podcast.
We're doing it.
Okay.
And hello, recovery family. And it's great to have you back for another great episode of the Unashamed Recovery Podcast with Josh and Drew. That's Drew. I'm Josh. And here at Unashamed Recovery Podcast, we believe that there is healing in the story of our scars and that it is okay to not be okay.
It is our sole mission to break the shame and stigma of addiction and recovery by sharing real stories of real people with real experiences and real sobriety.
That's the best I've ever heard you do that. And in today's episode, we're just going to take it way down. And we're not bringing in a guest to talk about their testimony that we usually do. We're really not going to talk about in depth of a recovery topic. We're going to talk about something that's super important to us. And that is...
Matter of fact, it factors into our name.
Yeah. It's basically who we are. We're going to talk about what it is to be unashamed.
Yep.
And so, back in 2019, when I started the podcast, I was coming in off of a severe porn and sex addiction. And the shame and the guilt that came from that, it was horrible. And I never wanted anybody else to feel that way. And just to give you a backstory, and then we're going to move into it, but to give you a backstory, one night, it was my very first time at Celebrate Recovery in almost 4 years, where I was to get up in front of everybody and actually read off the 8 principles. And if you know anything about Celebrate Recovery, you introduce yourself. Hey, I'm a grateful believer in Jesus Christ. I celebrate recovery from blah. My name is Josh. And so I did that.
Yeah.
And I plugged in, hey, I struggle with porn and sex. And it was the very first time that I'd ever said that in front of the whole group, mixed company, men and women. I'd always talked about that
right
in front of the men's group. But as far as the group as a whole, men and women, I'd never mentioned that. And afterwards, a man came up to me and said, man, I needed to hear that. He said, I thought I was struggling with this alone. He said, I will never come out and say that, but I needed to hear somebody else. And right then and there, I made a point that I would always share
right
wherever I was at, because that's how much it meant to somebody. And because we're all struggling with different things, and people need to know we're not struggling alone.
Right.
And so that's what the Unashamed Recovery Podcast is about. We're breaking shame
and guilt,
and we're breaking stigma.
Yeah.
Because we're talking about the things that people are struggling with but don't talk about. So, Drew,
I remember going into my first meeting at Celebrate Recovery, and then actually going through the step study. Step study is basically step work for those of you who just go to NA and AA. But I remember going through the step study, and then I found out it was so much bigger than just addiction. It was just so much bigger than the drugs. It was so much bigger than that. I had anger issues. I had codependency issues. I had self-worth issues. I had shame and guilt, just basically still wearing it as a cape, even though I wasn't even using drugs. I mean, I'm still wearing shame and guilt as a cape. But what is guilt to you, Josh?
Guilt is this, I know that it's wrong.
Right.
And I know I've done wrong. And it's this, it's basically my conscience letting me know.
What if it's God ordained conviction?
Yeah, it could be the Holy Spirit
convicting you at that point.
Tapping you on the shoulder, convicting you of that.
So what is shame to you at this point? Well, I say at this point, but what is shame to you?
Shame is where I let what I've done I hide it. I don't want nobody to know about it because I'm embarrassed about it.
Right.
And I don't want a soul on this earth to know about it because I'm afraid of how they're going to react about it.
So basically, this is something that was put in front of me not too long ago. Is that basically guilt comes from God, shame comes from people's opinions.
Ooh.
Like, how deep is
Man.
that? Right?
Man.
Like, guilt comes from God because generally you feel guilty when you do something wrong or you wrong somebody. You know, you have that guilt feeling and then it stays with you. But when we feel shame, shame is world induced. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Because we're so focused on what somebody else's opinion of us is that we feel like we're not worthy, and all of a sudden we feel that shame. It's not because that doesn't tie to guilt. You know what I'm saying? And so to be unashamed means I'm not worried about what the world says about me being a drug addict or a former drug addict. I'm not worried about what the world says about, you know, that I was a bad parent at one point in time, or I went to prison, or, you know, that I wrecked a car, or whatever the case may be. You know, I'm finally saying I can stand up and be okay with who I am.
Yeah, man.
So that's unashamed. Yeah, you know, that.
I love that.
Yeah.
You know, and I think you get to that place also by owning your story. If you have followed the podcast for any amount of time on social media or whatever, you've seen us use own your story, because to get to a place where you're unashamed, you first have got to get in there and you've got to own your story. It doesn't happen overnight.
Right.
And, you know, a lot of times it's not pretty.
No.
I mean, just be real about it. It's not a pretty process.
You know, when we evolve and change, it never is. It's kind of like the metamorphosis of a caterpillar to a butterfly. Yep. You wonder why they're in a cocoon? Because that's going to get real nasty real quick.
They basically dissolve into goo.
And to nothing, and then they get formed back up again. Yep. You know what I'm saying? And that's basically what we've done. You know, whether it be, you know, porn and sex, or whether it be, you know, the drug addiction. Addiction in itself is a melting down process. And then all of a sudden, when we decide we want to recover, we start to metamorphose, or we start to blossom and become something different. Shame, however, to me, to live in shame, it means basically that you're internalizing all that guilt, that you've turned it inward. And you believe everything that either has been said about you, what you've said negatively about yourself. And so, and it's pretty funny that when you read the Bible, when you start getting into Scripture, is when you bring something to the light, when you bring it to the truth, all of a sudden your pathway is made easier, right?
Yeah.
So the more that we talk about these things, and we have people come on, and we bring all these subjects to light that, you know, are generally breaking the stigma of addiction.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever noticed, like, it's so much different to not internalize that anymore, to get it out in the open. Man. You know, that's what I feel like our podcast does. It lets you not hold it in anymore and pour that cup out and pour something new in.
Oh yeah. But also I think what's so about with the podcast is you have people who have probably been struggling with an issue for their entire life.
Yeah.
And they've struggled with it alone, thinking that there's nobody else out there that's as bad as them. And I'm just alone. And then they hear these stories, and for the first time in their life, they're like, man, somebody gets me. There's somebody else out there struggling with this. I'm not alone. And I think that right there in itself is a lot of power, realizing that we're not alone.
Right.
I think that's, man.
But also realizing that, you know, the more that we dwell in guilt, and the more that we dwell in shame, it starts to cut at our soul. Because, like I said, you know, we don't only believe these things that we tell ourselves. As you think, you shall become. Man, you know, so if you think you're guilty, or which that's okay to acknowledge, you know, to say, hey, I'm guilty about this, you know, but to allow that to turn into shame, I think that's the true, what's the word that I'm looking for? I think that's the true torture for ourselves, as we let it turn into shame. We let it turn into something that we opinionate to ourselves and live it out. and we hide. We hide from people. We hide from people who can get us out of it, and that's what I think the show is. That's why we call it Unashamed. It's not to be proud or boastful. Yeah. It's to say, hey, look, I'm going to live above the opinion. I'm going to live above what the statistic is. I'm going to live above, the rule. You know what I'm saying? Because generally society creates these rules and we live by them. But I think there's a rule that has said at some point in time, oh, you're a drug addict or you're a felon. You're going to have to live below this line now.
Yeah.
That's not, dude, if I would have followed that rule and not lived my life unashamed, I don't think I could have ever been on this podcast, for one. I don't think I could ever speak at a group, and I dang sure don't think my life would be where it's at today.
Most definitely. Yeah. We want to keep this episode short, so we're about to wrap this up. But two things that I want to say, to get out there for being unashamed. First is, and I love this, I use it all the time. Unashamed is recovering out loud. It's recovering loudly so that others don't die quietly.
Yep.
And that's a huge thing, because when we talk about these things, it takes away the stigma. People know that there's help and people can go get help. And then the second thing, Unashamed Recovery Podcast is the living embodiment of, hey, I was rescued out of the pit so that I can go back to the pit and pull more people out of that pit.
Yeah.
Because now I know the way out. That's unashamed.
Yeah, it really is.
I mean,
because think about it. If you live in shame, you're hiding away.
Yeah.
You put yourself in a dark corner and basically face the corner.
Yeah. And when we become unashamed, we're breaking our anonymity for the sole purpose for other people.
Yep.
And that's it. That's it. That's it in a nutshell.
You took the words right out of my mouth. I was really about to say that.
I beat you to the punch.
You've been around me too long.
But anyway. So, I mean, that's it. You have now learned the secret to the Unashamed Recovery Podcast. Good night, everybody.
Pretty much.
But yeah, I mean, that's it. That's what we're all about. We're thinking less of self for others. I've been in this situation. I know the way out. Let me show you. Me and Drew, we're very blessed. We're very fortunate. We get to travel all over, share our story.
Right.
We don't go and do this because we like talking about ourselves. There is no glory whatsoever in sharing with people of how horrible of a porn addict and a husband that I was. There's no glory in that for me.
No.
It's only shame. But when I tell my story through the lens of the redemption, through my salvation in Jesus Christ and what He's done in my life, then my story does become about glory because it's about Him and what He's done.
I think the more that we hold shame and guilt in, I think we're ultimately punishing ourselves for the things that we did in our addiction, or the things that we did that we know we should have changed, or put a stop to at some point. And it doesn't do us any good or the people around us to live in that, those two things, guilt or shame. Yeah. So it's better to be unashamed.
Well, we could have ended right there. That would have been so smooth. People would have thought we would have planned that.
Right?
But yeah, like I said, this episode, we just wanted to take it down, and we just wanted to talk for a minute, because this isn't something that we get to talk about a lot, but this is something that means a lot to me and Drew, because this is what we're passionate about, is this very message. And so if you're out there and you're in recovery and you're still hiding behind your anonymity, consider other people. Now, I'm not telling you, hey, go break your anonymity tonight. I mean, because your anonymity is there for a reason.
Yeah.
I mean, it serves a purpose.
Yeah.
But once we get to a certain place in our recovery, we do eventually get to step 12, which is to go take this message to other people.
And then by that, we have that spiritual awakening.
That's right.
Yeah.
So, as a part of our 12 steps, at some point we've got to break that anonymity and we become unashamed. So, with that, y'all, thank y'all for watching. Very short, but I think there was a lot in this.
Yeah.
And once again, like always, if you've got anything for me and Drew, if you got questions, comments, if you want to recommend a topic for the show, or maybe recommend a guest, or maybe you want to tell us how great we're doing, send us an email, unashamedpodcast@yahoo.com. Unashamedpodcast@yahoo.com. And once again, guys, if you're watching this, or if you're listening to this, whatever your favorite streaming app is, click like, click subscribe, share. It helps get our message out to more and more people. We can't do this without you, Recovery fam. We love y'all. And until next time, guys, we hope you are unashamed.